Master Sergeant Ellie Travis stepped out of her Humvee and into the heavy smoke that still clung to the training grounds at Fort Liberty. The acrid smell of burned fuel and scorched metal filled her nostrils. Mingling with the sharp tang of sweat and dust, the blast had leveled several structures in the exercise area, leaving twisted beams and shattered concrete in a chaotic maze. Her boots crunched over debris as she surveyed the scene, her eyes scanning for details the drones and thermal sensors had missed. Despite 15 years of experience as a military police investigator with specialized tracking training, she felt the familiar weight of dismissal pressing down on her. Colonel David Kincaid, standing with his officers in the command post, had already decided that technology could do the job, that her skills were secondary, unnecessary, and in some ways a liability. The drones hovered silently overhead, infrared cameras painting heat signatures across their screens, all reporting nothing alive in the ruins. Ground-penetrating radar revealed voids, but nothing human. Ellie knew they were looking at numbers, not people, and she felt a surge of frustration tighten her chest. She forced herself to take a slow breath and center her mind. Pushing aside the anger and the simmering resentment that always rose when she was underestimated, this was not the first time she had been sidelined, and she knew it would not be the last. Memories from Afghanistan rose unbidden, of narrow alleyways in Mosul, where she had tracked insurgents through rubble that satellite images had dismissed as empty. She remembered her time in Helmand province, following blood droplets, no larger than a pinhead across rocky passes to find a kidnapped journalist, earning a Bronze Star for skills few outside special operations units even recognized. She had been effective, precise, and cautious, but always watched, evaluated, and sometimes overruled. The Syrian mission that had haunted her years later came to mind when she had tracked an enemy force with accuracy, only to be contradicted by officers, leading to casualties she could neither prevent nor erase from memory. The investigation cleared her actions, yet whispers had followed, and a reputation for knowing too much lingered like a shadow. Even now, standing amid this new devastation, she felt the familiar sting of skepticism from those who preferred data on a screen to intuition on the ground. Ellie's gaze drifted across the wreckage, settling on a series of disturbed earth patches and shifted debris that hinted at movement. She could see what the cameras could not retell: faint traces of someone having pulled themselves toward cover, subtle disruptions in dust patterns, tiny marks on concrete slabs that suggested a life struggling to survive. Her grandfather's lessons in the Appalachian hills came back to her, clear and unyielding. He had taught her that every footprint, every shift of earth, told a story to those who were willing to read it. At 10, she could track deer through the leaf litter. By 15, she was locating lost hikers for county search and rescue, honing a patience and attention to detail that would become the backbone of her military career. Those lessons, combined with the sharp logic of her MP investigations, had always given her an edge in situations where others relied solely on machines and maps. The command post radio crackled with reports and orders, voices blurred and clinical. Ellie nodded politely at the officers around Colonel Kincaid, acknowledging instructions while mentally charting the paths through rubble that the machines would never understand. Each second that passed was a life potentially slipping further from reach, and she felt the weight of responsibility press against her chest. The frustration and isolation simmered alongside determination, a quiet fire that refused to be ignored. She had survived combat, navigated bureaucracies, and trained herself to notice the imperceptible. Now, as she stared at the broken landscape before her, she knew that the work that mattered most would not be dictated by drones or thermal screens, but by the instincts she had carried from the mountains of Tennessee to the deserts of the Middle East. The challenge lay ahead, and she was ready to move, carefully, deliberately, trusting what her eyes and training could reveal where others saw only emptiness. Master Sergeant Ellie Travis paused at the perimeter of the collapsed training area, adjusting the straps of her compact IFAK and checking the IR strobe clipped to her chest. The air was thick with smoke and dust, settling in her lungs and coating her gloves with fine gray powder. She lifted the handheld thermal monocular and scanned the outer edges where the drones and sensors had reported nothing. The screens showed only cold metal and concrete, empty voids with no hint of life. But her trained eyes detected subtle disturbances. A scuffed boot heel left an uneven mark on a metal beam. Ash patterns swirled differently around a twisted girder, suggesting movement through the debris. A small strip of fabric, torn from a uniform, caught on exposed rebar, fluttering slightly in the breeze. Each detail was a whisper of life that machines could not understand. A language she had learned in the hills of Tennessee from her grandfather. He had taught her to read nature, to notice the way soil shifted under a deer's hooves, or how displaced rocks marked the path of a predator. Those lessons were now her compass through the chaos of concrete and steel. Ellie knelt and traced a finger along the dust, noting the drag marks that hinted at someone pulling themselves toward cover. She imagined the force of the explosion, the way it had lifted vehicles and bent beams, and she calculated the likely survival zones. Certain areas of the collapse formed natural pockets, small voids shielded from the direct force of the blast, where a person could cling to life. She mapped these in her mind, connecting the patterns in the ash with the layout of the wreckage, creating a mental blueprint invisible to the drones above. The knowledge settled over her like a calm tide, a quiet confidence that her instincts were right. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation, knowing she had found the paths that could lead to someone still breathing. Colonel Kincaid's voice crackled over the radio, dismissing her observations as speculation. The drones had not detected heat, the ground-penetrating radar saw nothing, and according to protocol, no further boots-on-the-ground search was warranted. Ellie acknowledged the instructions outwardly, but inwardly she weighed the time, the risks, and the certainty that someone was alive if she trusted what she could see with her own eyes. The tension tightened like a cord in her chest. Every second she hesitated. A life could be lost. And yet crossing that line meant acting outside orders, risking her career, and potentially her safety. She inhaled deeply, tasting the smoke and dust, and let the sensations of the ruined site guide her decisions. Moving forward, Ellie stepped over fallen beams and chunks of concrete, her gloves scraping along rusted metal and jagged surfaces. The creaking of the wreckage under her weight echoed through the ruins, a reminder that any misstep could be fatal. She followed the faintest traces of motion, connecting boot heels, ash patterns, and the torn fabric into a path leading toward the center of the collapse. Each step was deliberate, each handhold chosen with precision. As she traced the invisible trail that no camera could detect, the calculated risk weighed on her, but it also sharpened her senses, focusing every thought on survival and rescue. In that moment, Ellie trusted nothing but her training, her instincts, and the knowledge carried through generations. Every sound, every smell, every subtle shift in the environment became part of the story. The debris was telling her the choice to enter this danger zone alone was hers, and with it came the quiet determination that she would follow the signs wherever they led, no matter the cost. Ellie moved carefully through the debris-strewn corridors of the partially collapsed medical building, her eyes scanning every shadow and every irregularity in the floor for the signs she had learned to read over a lifetime. The smell of dust and scorched materials filled the air, mingling with the faint metallic scent of blood. In a small, dimly lit storage area, she found Brigadier General Alan Monroe slumped against a wall, his uniform soaked through, and a deep arterial laceration cutting across his left thigh. Blood had pooled beneath him, and his breathing was shallow, ragged, and irregular. The emergency lighting flickered, casting long shadows that shifted with every creak of the damaged building. Ellie knelt beside him, quickly assessing the wound. Her hands moved with precision, Following TCCC protocols, she had practiced countless times. She applied a tourniquet just above the injury, tightened it until the bleeding slowed, and then dressed the wound carefully. Using the remaining supplies in her IFAC, she established a saline lock, stabilizing him for further treatment. Every motion was deliberate, methodical, and infused with the urgency of knowing every minute mattered. As she worked, Monroe stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering. Recognition passed through his eyes when they met hers. A faint acknowledgement that she had arrived, that someone had seen the traces others ignored. His voice, weak but firm, conveyed an understanding that only someone who had trained and trusted their instincts could recognize. Between labored breaths, he told her that 2 soldiers from his convoy, Specialist Ramirez and Private First Class Nguyen, were still unaccounted for in the wreckage. The revelation pressed on Ellie like a physical weight, a moral and tactical dilemma that tore at her focus. She could evacuate Monroe immediately, ensuring his safety and fulfilling the obvious priority, or she could heed the hidden signs that suggested his soldiers might still survive if found quickly. The choice was stark. The stakes, life and death. Every instinct screamed that she should not delay. Yet her training as a soldier and her code of duty demanded she consider the lives of the missing Monroe, sensing her hesitation, mustered the strength to issue a direct order, despite his weakened state. "Find my soldiers first. No one gets left behind." His words were simple, but carried the authority of his rank and the moral weight of military values, anchoring her decision in the principles that had guided her career. Ellie absorbed the order. Letting it reinforce her resolve, she understood the risk, that prolonging their exposure could worsen Monroe's condition. But she also understood the code she lived by: no soldier left behind. No life dismissed, because it was inconvenient or hidden. The urgency pressed against her chest, the faint pulse of the emergency light, and the distant echo of shifting debris marking the passage of every crucial second. She drew a deep breath, feeling the tension in her muscles and the steadiness in her mind, balancing the immediate need for medical stabilization with the drive to locate the missing soldiers. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet she felt a quiet clarity, the same clarity that had guided her across mountains and deserts in the past. Reading signs invisible to others, Ellie's hands were steady as she prepared to move, ensuring Monroe was as stabilized as possible without hindering her next steps. She reviewed the paths through the debris, noting areas that could conceal survivors, identifying potential hazards, and mapping the safest course for herself and those she hoped to find. The silence around them was heavy, punctuated only by the occasional groan of stressed metal or the distant sound of dust shifting. Every sensory input mattered, and she absorbed it all, letting instinct and training guide her forward. The tension, the stakes, and the quiet intimacy of trust between 2 soldiers facing life and death created a solemn atmosphere, blending urgency with the deep humanity of her actions. In that space, Ellie was the embodiment of determination and duty, prepared to honor the order of her general and the unspoken promise she had carried through her years of service. Ellie moved toward the eastern edge of the blast zone, her boots crunching over twisted metal and shattered concrete. Every step measured and deliberate. The metallic scent of blood lingered faintly in the air, guiding her instincts as surely as a compass. Her eyes scanned the debris for subtle disturbances, the faintest shift in dust or ash that might mark the path of someone still alive. Following the signs, she came upon a collapsed maintenance shelter where the structural beams had fallen in a way that created a small pocket of space beneath the debris. Her training told her that someone could be trapped but alive, shielded by the twisted metal. She crouched low and peered into the gap, her heart tightening as she saw the outline of a vehicle partially intact beneath the wreckage. Inside, 2 soldiers were sheltered from the worst of the collapse. Specialist Ramirez was groggy and dazed but responsive, while Private First Class Nguyen lay unconscious, his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle, a femur clearly broken. The immediate danger was clear, and Ellie knew she had only minutes to act before their conditions could deteriorate further. Ellie quickly assessed the injuries, pulling supplies from her compact IFAK with practiced efficiency. She stabilized Nguyen's leg as best she could with improvised splints and secure padding, while checking Ramirez for shock and administering water and basic care. Her movements were swift but precise, each action informed by years of experience in field operations where mistakes could cost lives. She spoke to Ramirez in calm tones, encouraging him to stay alert and follow her instructions. The environment was oppressive, the air hot and still, dust and smoke swirling around her as she worked. She could feel her muscles screaming from the exertion of moving through the debris, but she did not allow herself to pause. The mission was greater than fatigue or discomfort. Every decision, every action, was calculated to maximize the chances of survival for the two soldiers. Knowing that helicopters could not land within the compromised debris field, Ellie pulled out her PRC-152 encrypted radio and transmitted their coordinates using standard military protocol. She ensured her message was clear and concise, giving the medevac crew all necessary information for a safe approach. Then she marked a small clear zone 75 meters from their location with her IR strobe, providing a visual reference for the incoming UH-60M Blackhawk Medevac. The bright infrared signal cut through the smoky twilight, a beacon of hope in the devastation. Ellie helped Ramirez to his feet, guiding him carefully across uneven surfaces toward the designated landing zone, and fashioned a makeshift litter from a section of tarp and nearby debris to carry Nguyen safely. She kept her focus unwavering, monitoring every movement and anticipating potential hazards that might compromise the extraction. The sound of rotors grew distant at first, then closer, and Ellie directed the approaching helicopter to the clearing with precise gestures and concise radio commands. She ensured both soldiers were securely positioned and ready for transfer before stepping back to let the medevac crew take over. Her work, however, was far from finished. Without hesitation, she turned back into the labyrinth of twisted steel and broken concrete, determined to locate Brigadier General Monroe. Her legs ached, her hands were scraped and blistered, and the oppressive heat pressed against her. But she pushed forward with the discipline and resolve that defined her as a professional. Each step was a calculated risk, and each breath measured. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced danger repeatedly and emerged with lives saved, letting instinct and training guide her through a landscape that was as dangerous as it was unpredictable. In every movement, there was urgency, precision, and an unspoken courage that carried her deeper into the ruins. Ellie emerged from the rubble at dawn, supporting Brigadier General Alan Monroe as the medevac crew took over. The light of early morning painted the wreckage in soft gold, highlighting the twisted metal and shattered concrete around them. Colonel Kincaid stood at a distance, silent and reflective, his usual confidence tempered by the undeniable success of her actions. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of smoke and dust from the previous night, and Ellie felt the weight of exhaustion in her legs and arms. But there was also a quiet satisfaction that made the effort worthwhile. As the Black Hawk lifted the general away, she took a slow, steadying breath, feeling the significance of what had been accomplished. Lives had been saved, not because of technology alone, but because of instinct, experience, and the refusal to ignore what could not be measured on a screen. In the days that followed, Ellie's role in the rescue was formally recognized. She received the Distinguished Service Medal, the ribbon gleaming against her uniform, a tangible acknowledgement of her skill, courage, and steadfast commitment. Soon after, a personal letter arrived from Monroe, now promoted to Major General, thanking her for her decisive action and including a photograph of her after-action report being briefed to TRADOC. The letter praised the clarity and effectiveness of her ground sign analysis techniques, noting how her insights had informed updated combat search and rescue and SEER manuals. Ellie felt a quiet pride as she read the words, knowing that her careful attention to detail and reliance on skills passed down from her grandfather were influencing the way future soldiers would be trained. Her approach, once doubted and dismissed, was now codified into doctrine, ensuring that tradition and intuition would complement technology in the field. Her career trajectory changed almost immediately. She was selected for early promotion and tasked with designing integrated training protocols, combining modern search methods with the traditional tracking she had mastered over decades. Each day in the new assignment brought challenges, but also the validation that her experience and judgment had real value. The transformation was subtle but profound. She was no longer the sidelined expert doubted by superiors, but a leader shaping how soldiers would approach search and rescue operations for years to come. There was no fanfare beyond the official ceremonies and the quiet respect of colleagues, yet the sense of accomplishment was deep and lasting. Finally, Ellie returned home to Tennessee, to the quiet hills that had shaped her childhood and taught her the ways of tracking and survival. She entered her living room where her daughter played quietly. A photograph of 3 generations displayed prominently, her grandfather teaching her to read tracks, Ellie following his lessons through mountain brush, and now her daughter learning the same discipline. In her hands, she held the brass compass that had belonged to her grandfather, worn smooth from decades of use. She passed it to her daughter, feeling the circle of knowledge and skill complete. There was a warmth in the moment, a connection that transcended medals, ranks, and reports. It was about legacy, about passing forward, not just tools, but the patience, observation, and courage that defined their family. Ellie stood by the window, looking out over the ridges that had once been the backdrop of her earliest lessons in patience and observation. She felt the weight of what she had carried through the years, the quiet victories that were rarely celebrated, and the lives she had touched through her steadfast dedication. The Army's recognition and the promotion were meaningful, but the true measure of her work was the continuity of skill, instinct, and judgment being passed on, shaping the future in ways invisible to most. Her journey concluded not in accolades alone, but in the living proof of her influence, the blending of past, present, and future into a quiet, enduring legacy.